So there's a guy who keeps bees on the roof of the Paris Opera House. Thousands and thousands of bees just buzzing away above one of the most famous buildings on Earth, producing honey that gets sold in the gift shop. And somehow, that's not even the strangest true thing about the Palais Garnier. Because underneath that same building, beneath the gilded ceilings and the velvet seats and the chandelier that, yes, actually did fall on the audience, there is a lake. A real, actual body of water sitting in the dark beneath the opera house. Gaston Leroux didn't make that up for his novel. The lake was there first. The Phantom was inspired by it. And the full truth of what's hiding inside that building is so genuinely bizarre that the fiction almost undersells it. So today we're going question by question through the real secrets of the Palais Garnier. And I promise you, reality is stranger than any musical Andrew Lloyd Webber ever wrote. Let's start with the obvious one. Why on earth is there a lake underneath one of the most prestigious cultural landmarks in France? The answer starts in 1861, when the architect Charles Garnier won a competition to design a brand new opera house for Paris. He was 35 years old, relatively unknown, and suddenly tasked with building what Emperor Napoleon III wanted to be the crown jewel of Baron Haussmann's massive renovation of the city. Garnier had grand ambitions. The problem was the ground beneath his chosen site. When workers started digging the foundations, they hit water. A lot of water. The site sat on a high water table, and no matter how aggressively they pumped, groundwater kept flooding in. For 8 months, pumps ran continuously, day and night, and they still couldn't get the excavation dry enough to lay foundations. So Garnier made a decision that was equal parts engineering genius and sheer stubbornness. Instead of fighting the water, he worked with it. He designed an enormous concrete cistern beneath the building, essentially a sealed reservoir that would hold the groundwater in a controlled way, stabilizing the pressure on the foundations rather than letting it push up unpredictably from below. That cistern filled with water and became the famous underground lake. It's not decorative. It's not a swimming pool for Phantom cosplayers. It's a structural feature. The building literally needs that water to stay standing. The lake sits about 50 feet below street level, in a vaulted stone chamber that looks like something out of a Gothic cathedral. And yes, it's still there. It's still full of water. And the Paris Fire Brigade actually uses it as a training site for their divers, because apparently that's just a normal thing that happens beneath the opera. Here's question number 2. And it's a big one for Phantom fans. That iconic moment when the chandelier crashes down into the audience. Did anything like that actually happen? Yes. On May 20th, 1896, during a performance of the Opera Hellé, a counterweight from the chandelier broke free and came crashing through the ceiling into the auditorium. It killed a concierge named Madame Chaumette, who was seated in the cheap seats on the 4th level. One person dead, several others injured, all from a piece of the chandelier mechanism falling without warning during a live performance. The main chandelier itself weighs about 8 tons. It holds over 340 lights, and in 1896 it was suspended by a system of counterweights that, on that particular evening, catastrophically failed. Gaston Leroux, who was a journalist before he was a novelist, would almost certainly have known about this incident. When he published The Phantom of the Opera in 1910, just 14 years later, he folded the chandelier disaster right into the story. But he also did something clever. He wove in other real details from the opera house, things most readers would never have known were true, including the underground lake, the labyrinth of 17 stories below stage level, and the rumor that a skeletal body had been discovered in the basement during construction. Which brings us to our next question. Just how much of Leroux's novel was drawn from real life? More than you'd think. Leroux was a journalist who covered crime and municipal affairs. He had access to the Palais Garnier. He knew its layout, its history, and its rumors intimately. The underground lake, real. The chandelier disaster, real. The fact that the opera house has a bewildering network of underground levels filled with forgotten corridors, trapdoors, and hidden passages, absolutely real. The Palais Garnier extends roughly the same distance below ground as it does above, with 17 sublevels used for stage machinery, storage, water management, and infrastructure. During the construction of the building, which dragged on for 15 years due to war and political upheaval, there were persistent stories about a mysterious figure seen in the lower levels. Workers reported odd noises, strange sightings, tools going missing. Was there an actual disfigured musical genius living beneath the building? Almost certainly not. But the atmosphere of the place practically begs for that kind of legend. And there's one more real detail that Leroux borrowed. In 1907, workers exploring a walled-off section of the opera's cellars reportedly found a skeleton. The identity was never confirmed, and the story has been embellished over the decades, but the timing is notable. Leroux began writing his novel around the same period, A Mysterious Body in the Catacombs of the Opera House. You can see how the story practically wrote itself. All right, question 4, and this one has nothing to do with the phantom, but everything to do with the ongoing weirdness of this building. Who authorized a beekeeping operation on the roof of the Paris Opera, and why? Since 1982, there has been an official apiary on the rooftop of the Palais Garnier. It started with a single hive placed there by a member of the opera's staff who happened to be an amateur beekeeper. The idea was almost a lark, but the bees thrived. Paris, it turns out, is an excellent environment for honeybees. The city bans most pesticides in its parks and gardens, and there's an enormous diversity of flowering plants within flight range of the Opera House, including the Tuileries Garden and the flower markets along the boulevards. The rooftop hives now produce several hundred pounds of honey per year. It's a golden, richly flavored honey that gets jarred and sold at the Opera House gift shop for a fairly steep price. The beekeeper role has been passed down over the decades and is treated as a legitimate, if unusual, staff position. So if you ever visit the Palais Garnier, you're standing inside a building that has a lake in its basement, a chandelier with a body count, 17 levels of hidden underground infrastructure, and an active honey farm on the roof. The building is essentially a vertical ecosystem of beautiful absurdity. Final question, and it's the one that keeps historians and urban explorers up at night. What else is hiding in those 17 sub-levels that we don't know about? The honest answer is that large portions of the Palais Garnier's underground spaces are not open to the public and haven't been thoroughly catalogued in any modern comprehensive survey. We know about the lake. We know about the stage machinery, some of which dates back to the original 1875 installation and still uses counterweight systems that are essentially Victorian technology. We know there are corridors that connect to other parts of Paris's underground network, though exactly how and where those connections lead is not always well documented. During World War II, the resistance reportedly used sections of the opera's lower levels as meeting points and message drops, taking advantage of the building's labyrinthine layout and multiple hidden exits. Some of those passages were sealed afterward and have never been reopened. There are also persistent rumors, never fully confirmed or denied, of entire rooms and chambers that were bricked up during various renovations over the last century and a half. The Palais Garnier has been in continuous use since 1875. That is nearly 150 years of modifications, repairs, wartime improvisations, and institutional forgetting. The building is its own archaeological site, layered with history that even its current custodians don't fully understand. And that, more than anything Gaston Leroux invented, is what makes it one of the most fascinating structures in Europe. So the next time someone tells you that the Phantom of the Opera is a great story, remind them that the real building is even better. A lake in the basement, bees on the roof, a chandelier that actually killed someone, resistance tunnels, lost rooms, and an architect who looked at a flooded construction site and said, "You know what, let's just keep the water." Now here's what I want from you. I know some of you are sitting on an obscure fact about the Palais Garnier or the Paris Underground that I didn't mention today. Maybe it's about the catacombs, the sewer tours, or some other piece of subterranean Parisian insanity. Drop it in the comments. I genuinely want to read them. I might even turn the best ones into a follow-up video. And if this is the kind of deep dive into the weird truth behind famous stories that you enjoy, subscribing is the easiest way to make sure the next one finds you. Thanks for watching. I'll see you in the next one.